Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tucker, and today I'm going to be bringing back something that I used to do and that everybody seemed to enjoy, and that is General Manager Monday. This is a series in which I take a look at a team's payroll and roster situation and give 3 options for them to take moving forward. Today's team is the Minnesota Timberwolves, who've been in the news a lot lately as it relates to issues within the organization, whether it be Jimmy Butler or Karl Anthony Towns or Andrew Wiggins or head coach Tom Thibodeau. Things haven't been great in Minnesota this offseason. But before I get to the options they could take as a franchise, there are a few things that I want to make clear. First of all, in every one of these scenarios, I wouldn't want Tom Thibodeau to be the head coach of the team anymore. I just don't have any faith in him as the right guy for this team, and a fair amount of the team's issues seem to stem from him. At the time he was hired, I thought it'd be a pretty good move for the franchise, as he had success as an assistant in Boston and as the head coach in Chicago, and had taken some time away from coaching to try and adopt a more progressive coaching philosophy as it relates to resting his players and proper spacing offensively. Unfortunately for him and the team, it just hasn't worked out for either of them to this point. Thibodeau still plays his stars way too many minutes in the regular season, and the team was dead last in three-point attempts last season. He also hasn't done great work in the personnel department, as many people see the Jimmy Butler trade as a mistake now with the current climate around his impending free agency and the young players they gave up to acquire him. To me, in order for this team to move forward, a new head coach is needed. Second, there's a ton of unpredictability around the Timberwolves payroll moving forward into the summer of 2019. As of now, they're at $91 million in guaranteed contracts for that summer, which gives them around $9 million in cap space. But in reality, their payroll could vary from $53 million all the way up to $133 million, give or take. That $91 million projected number accounts for both Jeff Teague and Jimmy Butler to opt into their player options for the following season, and doesn't account for an extension for big man Karl Anthony Towns. If both Teague and Butler opt out and you don't account for Towns' extension, that leaves the team at $53 million in payroll. However, in what is a much more likely scenario, if the Wolves manage to keep Butler, Teague would opt in, Butler would get a max or close to it, and Cat would get a max similar to the one that Devin Booker just signed. In that case, Butler's salary for the following season would be $35 million, or maybe even more if he becomes eligible for a Supermax extension, while Towns' deal would put him at around $27 million in salary for the following season. Along with Teague's opt-in, that puts the team at $133 million in payroll committed to just 9 players. That is well over the luxury tax without the team adding any significant pieces to a roster that isn't close to championship contention. Now, depending on any number of variables, that payroll could end up being higher or lower, and could truly end up anywhere between $53 and $133 million. So not only is it important to keep in mind as I go through these scenarios, but also shows how unpredictable the Wolves roster is moving forward. Alright, now let's get on to the options the team could take. Option 1, trade Butler now. As you probably could have guessed, all these scenarios first revolve around how the team chooses to handle Butler's impending free agency. In this option, the team would trade Butler now before the start of the season, which is when his value is arguably at its highest, as the team trading for him would have him on the roster for the entire regular season. The problems here are obvious though, as the team trading for him would likely have no guarantee that he would stick around next year, and even if he did, it would probably take a max contract to keep him around, given the amount of cap space available in 2019. And giving that much money on a long-term deal to a player that's about to turn 30 and has had his fair share of injury issues in the past isn't ideal. All of these things would likely bring down Butler's trade value significantly from what the Bulls got in return for him on draft night in 2017. And not only that, but what exactly would the Timberwolves be trading for? They're honestly in a pretty tough spot as a franchise, as they do have a great young player in Karl Anthony Towns, but the quote-unquote other guy that is supposed to be a building block for them is Andrew Wiggins, and his max deal is not good value at all in terms of what he brings to the floor at this point in his career. So do the Wolves try and trade Butler for some veterans that could keep them in the playoff hunt, or maybe some younger assets to try and build around Wiggins and Towns? Well, if they want to trade for veterans, they might as well keep Butler, because they won't get equal value in return for him, while on the other hand, if they choose to trade for younger pieces, they probably wouldn't find a deal that would provide them with very much value in that department, given his free agency situation. I'll save specific details for a Trade Machine Tuesday episode later on, because I'm pretty sure this ordeal will drag on well into the regular season. But if this is the option Minnesota chooses, and I would be shocked if it was, I wouldn't expect a big return for Butler if I was a Timberwolves fan. How they moved forward from there would depend on what they got back in the trade, but more than likely they wouldn't make the playoffs without Butler on the roster and would wait out Teague and Gorgui Dieng's deals coming off the books while signing Cat to a max deal in 2019 and building through their younger players and draft picks while maintaining the cap flexibility to potentially make some moves in free agency over the next handful of summers, with a potential Wiggins trade thrown in there as well if they could find a team to take him off their hands for some reason. Option 2. Wait until the trade deadline. The next option for Minnesota is to keep Butler through the middle of the season and reevaluate his situation at the trade deadline. This allows them to see how they play with another year of this group together and hopefully healthy, and if things go well, it could make it much easier to convince Butler to stay this summer. They won't be challenging for a top seed in the conference or anything, and are at absolute best a second-tier team in the West, but any kind of positive momentum would help increase their chances of retaining Butler. On the other hand, if things don't go well as a result of injuries or simply not playing well as a team, they do still have the option of trading him at the deadline. This would be a risky play for a number of reasons, as his value will go down at that point because just as before, the team trading for him would have no guarantee of him sticking around in the offseason. And in this scenario, they would only get him for the final stretch of the season and the playoffs. The Wolves likely wouldn't get a ton in return for Butler at all at that point, and the priority would just be getting something back for him if they're convinced he won't re-sign. The only way this could play out in their favor is if a team that is desperate for championship contention sees Butler as the final piece to the puzzle at the deadline and is willing to give up some valuable assets for him in their desperation. But given the current climate of contention in the NBA, that seems unlikely. This option does give the team a good amount of leeway in what they do with Butler's free agency, but as I said in the beginning, is fairly risky, and should they not be able to find a trade partner for him at the deadline, or he gets hurt beforehand, they could end up with nothing in return for him if he left the team in the offseason. Option 3. Keep Butler through the entire season. Last up is an option that I think is probably the most likely at this point, simply because of the issues I talked about earlier in terms of the team getting less than market value in trade return for Butler, but also because I doubt the team is ready to give up on a team that did have its fair share of issues, but also brought the franchise its first playoff berth in a long time. Unless they really struggle to start the season, this is still a playoff team in the West if they can put these offseason issues behind them and stay healthy. They don't seem to be interested in trading Butler now, which would allow them to get the most value in return. And if they wait until the deadline, they'll probably be high enough in the standings that it wouldn't make much sense to trade away their best player, with back-to-back playoff appearances a significant possibility. If they do keep him and he becomes eligible for a Supermax extension by being named to an All-NBA team this coming season, that would give them an extra bargaining chip in trying to retain him this summer if they're interested in giving him that kind of money given his age and past injury issues. If they choose this option and they aren't able to bring him back this summer, they do obviously miss out on a good amount of trade value had they moved him before he left, but I really don't think it would have been a franchise-altering return in terms of assets anyway. It obviously would be tough to see their best player leave in free agency, and any kind of value in a trade would be a positive, especially for a team pretty lacking in talent outside of Butler and Cat. But even though this wouldn't necessarily be my choice for the franchise moving forward, I do think that it's the most likely. I would kick the tires on Wiggins and Butler trades right now before the season starts, and depending on the value I could get in return, I would either take those deals or keep working the phones for those two guys throughout the season up until the deadline. I doubt there would be very much trade value for either, especially Wiggins given his contract situation, but at this point, as I said, I would keep my options open from a roster construction perspective. I do know that I would rather not be paying $133 million for 9 players that aren't in championship contention as a small market team, which, if you're looking at it from a talent perspective on the roster for the 2019-2020 season, is the best case scenario for Minnesota moving forward. When you put it that way, this is really a lose-lose situation for the franchise that begun when they hired Thibodeau and traded for Butler on draft night, and now they have to find a way to dig themselves out of this hole, or they'll risk dropping back down into the familiar ground of the bottom of the NBA standings. And that is going to be the end of today's video. Coming up next on Wednesday is the return of the team preview series, this time with a community choice of the Utah Jazz. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous Monday, Wednesday, Friday videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.